and I'd like to publicly appreciate his passion for his subject, his patience and perseverance, which are the hallmarks of a scholar in the making. With these words, I'd like to invite Professor Ilayya for his keynote.
Professor S.M. Sajid, Vice Chancellor of this august university, Professor Asaduddin, Director of the Seminar and Head Department of English, and Dr. Saroj Mahananda, who has been literally after me for more than 4 months. I'm extremely thankful to this university and feel honored to have been invited to give a keynote in English department conference, because by practice I'm a political scientist, and by my own evolution I'm a buffalo of this country, not a cow. So when when in a country of cow, when buffalo comes to inaugurate, there will be problems. But yet this university and the department, which have something common to do with my own university back in Hyderabad, Maulana Azad National Urdu University, because they're basically the institutions that are trying to build a multicultural academic discourse, and particularly looking at the minority question all over. Now, having said this, I will briefly sketch out what Dalit literature. I would, for a convenience sake, use Dalit Bahujan as an expanded kind of a term that I myself used in Why I'm Not a Hindu, and the whole question of historiography. And what is the status of literary studies today in India, and particularly English literary studies and comparative studies, cultural studies, the whole range of discourse of nationalism around language departments is also an engaged question. Now, during the anti-colonial period, there were 2 trends in the literary domain. One was essentially deriving inspiration from the Hindu textuality. And the largest number of nationalists, from Raja Ram Mohan Rai to very young literary figures, political and literary figures, or theoreticians up to Raman or Lohiya, they looked at the literary history of India as the Hindu literary history. So it were the Vedas, it were the Upanishads, it were essentially Ramayana and Mahabharata, who figured as the central discursive engagement of constructing modern India by connecting to the Indian past. But there was another stream with a deep past of its own, which was essentially started by Mahatma Jyotirao Phule. It gave its inspiration from not the Hindu textuality, but from the Buddhist, suttas and pitakas, and also the people's literature that is available, songs, their own stories. For the first time, it was Mahatma Phule when he wrote Gulamgiri. He was the first Sudra educated man in the modern period, slightly junior to Raja Ram Mohan Rai. When Raja Ram Mohan Rai designated the Renaissance period, what they called as Brahma Samaj, essentially drawing the life experience of Brahmins and the Hindu textuality, Mahatma Phule had constructed an alternative, different notion for Indian nationalism itself. That was Satya Shodhak Samaj, the truth seekers society. Now, this is, if you look from communalism and secularism point of view, Raja Ram Mohan Rai was deeply into Brahmanic communalism. And Mahatma Phule was not doing Sudra communalist work, was not doing a Dalitist communalist work. But what was he doing was looking for the truth, searching for the truth from the field and also from the text. Now, for the entire Indian national leadership, again from Raja Ram Mohan Rai to Gandhi to, even Nehru was part of the whole thing. It were the Ramayana and Mahabharata figures who were inspirational. Krishna driving the Ratha and Arjuna sitting inside, and then that the Hindu leaders are, some of them are driving the Rathas. Gandhi was driving the Ratha, Nehru was sitting like Arjuna with a Mahatma Phule, and this became a painting in every house. Krishna's Radha and, four horses running, and again is the British. But inside their narrative, there was against Christian. It was not just against British. It was against Christian ethic. Now, for Mahatma Phule, it was not Krishna or Rama. It was Bali, the Bali Raja. The Bali who was crushed by Vaman, and the Keralites and the Marathas were looking that Bali would come back and establish a just society where there is no caste, creed, inequality, and so on and so forth. Now, it was Mahatma Phule, literary departments, history departments have done enough damage for this country by not looking at certain basic fundamentals. If the rape is a problem today, a few days back I wrote an article, it is there in internet, you see the roots of rape. I said the roots of rape go to Rigveda, Indira. And the Indian national leadership, most of them were child marriage leaders. Their wives were children. And they did not wait for consummation till the child becomes adult also. This is clear from even Gandhi's life. But the only man who married a child of 11 years did not make her wife of sex till she became an adult and also became educated was Mahatma Phule. In the bedroom, he was not using her for sex, but he was teaching. And she became the first teacher of India, women teacher. And where did they start the school? The Sudras. It was Tilak who planned for killing of Mahatma Phule. People don't tell this. Tilak was his contemporary. So, Mahatma Phule started a school for untouchable girls. In a history where the Sudra men could not go to school, Mahatma Phule started a school for untouchable girls. His own father expelled them, and they went and settled down in the Dalit Wada itself. But then came Ambedkar's methodology itself. The whole question of historiography. How do you study historiography? Ambedkar came to national movement and began to confront Mahatma Phule, Gandhi and Nehru. Nehru never engaged with him in debate. But Mahatma Gandhi was willing to engage because he was definitely a better Democrat. Was willing to engage on the question of untouchability, on the question of literary genre, on the question of the history, so on and so forth. Now, what came as an unexpected nationalist domain of literary discourse was that Ambedkar put in a massive way the Buddhist tradition on the national front. And any one of you who read my book, God as Political Philosopher, you go back to a section in that called Women's Section. Our latest EPW has an article on that. See, the women, the Dalit women, the Sudra women who joined Buddhist Sanghas, and the Granikas, the prostitutional women who were having no status outside the bedroom of the kings and the rulers, but within the bedroom they were treated as sexual animals with a lot of payments. Now, the richest among them was Amrapali. And Buddha, after they started opening up the Bhikkhuni Sanghas, Amrapali was invited to the Sangha, and Buddha himself stood first and saluted her. Now, in the entire Hindu narration, there is no such history of respect to women. But Sita became the model, Savitri became the model. So, there are two ways to look at historiography. One is what I call the historiography of productivity. The people who were producing food, the people who were artisans, the people who were producing pot, the people who were creating artifacts of, let us say, barber's knife. Now, see, Indian history did not examine the role of pot, the role of iron, the role of barber's knife, the role of shepherd, the role of iron smithing. And there were huge literary genres among them. Songs and proverbs, cultural idioms, food cultural domains, all of them. But because of the Hindu Brahmanic tradition, which got completely cut from the production, completely cut from the artisanal activity, and which saw this as undivine. God even could not touch a pot maker, a shoemaker, an ironsmith. Naturally, the literature that they produced was anti-production. When a literature becomes anti-production through the divine means and social means and cultural means, literary means, it also becomes anti-human. Because in a society where the producers and consumers are completely divided. Yesterday I was in Calcutta and Gayatri Spivak was there. I was asking her a simple question. Tell me why there is no creative thinker who produced a book from India of this population size, and the educated people who have gone to Oxford, Harvard, Cambridge, from not today, but from the days of Dadabhai Naoroji, Tilak, and Gandhi, Nehru, all of them. And from Dalit Bahujan tradition, original. Raja Ram Mohan Rai constructed its so-called Renaissance having gone to England. Mahatma Phule did not go anywhere. His Renaissance started from within, from people's production. And he saw animals, he saw birds like Buddha, and saw friendship within the animal life. The songs that, he used cock as a symbol of clock. Cock as a symbol of clock. You read Mahatma Phule. So, all these people went abroad, studied Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard, any university that is possible, and more so of the Bengalis. But tell me why there is no single thinker that India produced who will be used in higher studies of all universities in the world. Like we use John Rawls today, like we use Plato, like we use Aristotle, or like we use Shakespeare as a literary figure, or Shelley. Is it because that there was imperial negativity in not recognizing the creativity of the Indian writers? As you have been not recognizing the local writers here? No, the standard is very bad. In spite of the fact that you all studied in the same Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard, your standard is very bad. Because, why? Even in Europe and America, the best literary source came from the productive communities. Adam Smith was a son of a smith. Even the poets, the best of the European poets, English poets, and the French poets were. Voltaire was a great poet. You know Voltaire's background? He came from an artisanal background. The fullers, the smiths, the shoemakers, the pot makers. And in India, the Brahmin who got delinked from production for 3,000 years, in whichever university they studied, they cannot produce world-class text. That is established. And Gayatri agreed with me. Because Gayatri is seen to be a very, very abstract theoretical writer. And Indians don't understand theory. Even the Dalit Bahujans, how can we? There is a theory among Dalit Bahujan life. There is a song. There is a rhythm. There is a proverb. But when you do not textualize it, you are not allowed to textualize it. God was not supposed to accept us. We were not supposed to write book. I come from a shepherd family. There are umpteen proverbs among shepherds which are of world-class abstract philosophical proverbs. But we could not write. We could not hybridize them. So neither we could hybridize the children, body and brain by intercaste marriage, nor we could hybridize education because of Brahmanism. So now Brahmins became very great thinkers. I said, why are these people running away from this country and settling in other countries and writing from there? The NRI writers are great writers in India. You recognize only NRI writers. Homi Baba, he was never there in India. Yeah, Gayatri. I said, Gayatri ji, I would have respected you more if you were to do the same theory if you were living in India. But your mind would have been spoiled by now. Because the environment is absolutely spoiling environment. Your own communities. Then she told me in my ear, when I was 17, I proposed to marry a Das who was an ICS officer at that age, 22 he was. And all his Brahmin communities opposed her. This was Gayatri's vivag. So intercaste marriage is not allowed. Interdining is not allowed. You don't know what I am eating. You hate what I eat. Is there a human being in the world who hates somebody's food? If somebody hates he is eating beef. I eat chicken, mutton, I ate lot of goat brains. Because that is the reason why my body is very weak, but there is some brain. Because the goat brain is supposed to be best. You know why goat brain is supposed to be best? Goat eats only medicinal plants. So since I come from shepherd background, my parents fed a lot of goat brain. Only brain is working little bit. It is not much. So the question is, if he eats beef, if I eat only mutton, chicken, not beef, because of the generational, whatever disconnection with beef. Now, if somebody else is only vegetarian, should it be an individual choice or should it be a caste choice? Or if there are people who go to Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard and come back and say that if I touch him, my body gets polluted, is that professor rooted in science or superstition? If the body pollution is still operating. And most of these Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard educated brains still are untouchable. Now I ask them, how many SC, ST, OBCs you trained in this country as scholars? Do you think that we don't have brains? If we don't have brains, tell me what is the relationship between production and knowledge? The English departments who discourse, debate about knowledge must understand, is not tiller having knowledge? Without knowledge, how can they till? Is not potter having a knowledge what kind of pottery we produced? Is not the Indian barber the greatest discoverer of the cleanly health science of shaving? Is shaving is health science or health destruction? If shaving is bad, then why are all these people, including Hindu gods, are getting shaven? If it is bad. So when I ask, look, Brahma's face is clean shaven, whether it is Ravi Varma's Brahma or somebody's Brahma, we don't know. But clean shaven. Vishnu's face clean shaven, Rama's face clean shaven, Krishna's face clean shaven. Who shaved them? Did they shave themselves? Now the barber who shaves this man with a sharp blade, you look at history, you know how to understand history. I, as an absolute buffalo shepherd, who I was along with buffalo in my childhood, if you don't understand when did we develop the sharp blade, when Europe developed sharp blade, how do you construct history properly? Now I have a very, very buffalo method of looking at things. Brahma's face is shaven, Krishna's face is shaven, Rama's face is shaven, but Socrates' face was never shaven. Plato's face was never shaven. Aristotle's face was never shaven. Even Jesus' face in first century was never shaven. That means there was no blade there. Here this barber's knife was there. To make a sharp knife of that quality to shave this body, not cut it, what could have been the iron melting process by then? Iron melting has advanced far ahead than the European system itself, the Chinese. Because even Chinese have no evidence of shaving. Now leave alone mythological figures. You have concrete evidence of all Jains, including Vardhaman Mahavira, clean shaving head, men and women. All Buddhists were clean shaven. Buddha got shaved by a barber called Upali, family barber, and he learnt shaving and he shaved him back. That was democracy, what we call Buddhist democracy. No Brahmin saint is ever shaven, nor I don't know whether they had bath. But there was no shaving. There was no shaving. Now, if Buddhist Sanghas were clean shaven, by then the Indian 6th century BC Indian blade was absolutely advanced. Now, if this were to be written about, the skills of the blade, the skills of shaving, the skill of nurturing people, cloth washing, is washing bad or good? Now, you have umpteen stories in Ramayana which made you make it the nationalist story. And in that story, why Rama sent Sita to forest? That there is a bad, washerman there. He was talking about Sita. No, absolutely dirty washerman. What was he doing? This man was accumulating dirt. Rama was accumulating. The washer was washing. Who is the clean source of cleanliness? A washerman. What did this washerwoman discover? You see my book, Post-Hindu India. The first discovery of soap was done in this country before world knew what soap was. Those were soil soaps. And the Dhobi women were great singers. And some of them joined Buddhist Sanghas in 6th century. And in Teri Gatha you find their songs which were remarkable. So what happened in this country was, you put a literary genre of Ramayana Mahabharata, of Kalidasa's Raghuvamsha, of anything. I mean, what is great if Kalidasa sent a love letter? One sends a love letter, which is a big text. Another writes only about how to make love, called Vatsayana. There is no other work. And this is the greatest book of India across the world. Most sold book from India, original Indian written book is what? Only Vatsayana's Kama Sutra. Now, I was asking, when Plato was writing Republic, why were you writing this book? This is a natural activity, animals also know. You don't have to teach them in those days. Now I can understand, let internet teach it. But what they did was to make production undivine, to make production non-acceptable to God, and to make people who were involved in production as mlechas, as chandalas. They wrote these books, Kautilya's Ardhashastra, Manudharma, and Vatsayana's Kama Sutras. So, why do we read Greek then? Is it because that I don't love my country, I hate Kautilya or Manu, and I love Plato and Aristotle? No, in Plato and Aristotle, there is a concrete theory. In Kautilya, there is no theory, nothing. Kill. Killing is the theory. In Manu, the same. So, naturally, the world doesn't care this. Now, see, there is a complete divide. When I was in my 9th year, I didn't go to school. The single teacher who was appointed to start a school there came to my house. My mother was twinkling, courtyard, cleaning the courtyard, and then she was twinkling, dung water around the house. The teacher came. He asked, please send your 2 sons to school because he has to survive. Somebody should send children. He didn't ask, send your 2 daughters. There were 2 daughters also. So my mother said, sending my children to school? No. If I send my children to school, devil Saraswati will kill them. What is this devil Saraswati you are calling? The teacher thought that Saraswati is goddess of education. My mother is saying devil Saraswati. No, Saraswati is goddess of education. Why are you talking like this? My grandmother came running from house and she said, look, Saraswati teaches Brahmans and Banyas, kills Sudras. Now that's so for 3,000 years, we had no education till the British and the Scottish came, started schools. And that is the reason why now our theory is the British came too late, went too early, unfortunately. Now they produced only Pule and Ambedkar. If they were to be here for some more time, yes, I was an English literature student in my BA, Because you know how I went to English literature? I thought of becoming a doctor. I got third class in PUC. Because third class people get only third class. So, Gayatri was telling that when in my school, we had a long discussion. I was not a brilliant student, but teachers were giving me good marks because they used to tell me I was good looking. For good looking, good marks. But for my bad looking, all sports, all this on my face, absolutely bad marks. So I got third class in PUC, then I couldn't go to medicine, then I took BA English literature. And I'll tell you, I felt liberated when I read the dramas, the poems, the literary history, because all kinds of people are coming into that as actors. All professions are coming there. And in Raghuvamsha, or in Kalidasa, or in Ramayana, Mahabharata, only one class comes. And what is their duty? Killing. So from Ramayana, Mahabharata killing to Hindi cinema killing, there is no difference. Killing, two things, love and killing. Nothing else. There is no production, there is no human relationship. So now, the Dalit Bahujan literature that is coming into regional languages is a plethora of multiple activities. And people don't want to translate. But whether you translate or not, we have been saying, wait for 20 years. Nobody will read your Ramayana Mahabharata. They will read only our texts. Because they are life. They are life, they are production. They are instrumentalities. And they are humanness. What is human? If human being does not engage with nature, I'm working on a book now called India Without Islam. When I was in PUC, I was in a town. Earlier, what were my gods and goddesses? The Pochamma, the stone goddess, and Lakshmi Narasimha. Simha with all this thing, killing somebody. I should be afraid of God for killing only, not love. Then one day, early morning, this prayer was coming on mic in Warangal. We never heard that. I asked my Muslim friend who was part of my room, that what is this? He said, it's a prayer. Oh, prayer at 4 o'clock? Why should they pray like this? We don't know praying thing. We go and give mutton to goddess and daru. And when I got this smallpox, my mother offered Pochamma, Dharu, one Patel, one sheep, and then Tadi. Then she said, you must protect this boy, both me and my brother, we got this. And I will give you all this, kallu, gillu, everything, whatever you drink. So she after she saved me, she took all this and put there. If you don't save, after getting all this, I'll put matti in your eyes. And Pochamma understood Telugu of my mother and saved me. And Hindu gods don't understand any other language except Sanskrit. Whereas Pochamma, then when I was not getting English, I went and asked Pochamma, I am not getting English. In conductor's English I spoke. She understood English and said, go and learn. I will be with you. See, Hindu gods don't understand our language. We are said to be Hindus, but they don't understand our language. So what happened in history is, our language was not supposed to be spiritual. Then when I looked at in the town, the masjid, I went to see the masjid, there was nothing. No God image, no stone, no threatening this thing. I said, how our people are afraid of God like this? Where is the God here? Only some letter. So, an Indian mind is used to be afraid of only image, body. And it was Islam which taught India how to be afraid of thought, philosophy. Islamic Allah is a philosophical Allah. There is nothing there. I keep asking my Muslim friends, see, you need to fast for 1 month. I can't think about it. But for 1 month, whom are you afraid of? Are you afraid of police? Are you afraid of our Narsimha like of God? Or, this BJP Rama? RSS Rama comes with Banam, as if just now he is coming from Dangal, from gym, fully grown up. We are afraid of only such gods. But a Muslim mind is afraid of abstract Allah. Completely abstract. There is no idol. Now that is the reason why in my Untouchable God, you read there is a chapter on Maharashtra. The body worship and brain worship are two different dimensions. Islam and Christianity believe in brain worshipping. And Hinduism, full-scale body worshipping. And that's how Ganapati came. Huge the borra, huge the stomach, huge the god is. The stomach should be bigger. Because without working, gods were eating our food. And they should see that no food remains to us. They should become, So it is in this, we now with vengeance create alternative literature. You read Why I'm Not a Hindu. I'm not a literary person. But that literature, that English came to me as if, I was singing along with buffalo sitting on buffalo. Then when I titled my book Buffalo Nationalism, all my friends started, what are you? Are you mad or what? What is this buffalo nationalism? Who will read this book? Now that is most popular. Because there are a lot of buffaloes coming into university now. Earlier only cows were coming. And these cows were not giving milk. These cows were drinking buffalo milk and coming to university, saying that we were pure, we were sacred, we were Kamadhenus. Now this is nonsense. So we need alternative titles, alternative proverbs, alternative. See, I use a very, very simple proverb that is there in English, in Telugu, to really put the whole thing upside down. There is a proverb among all communities of productive, tillers, the shoemakers, the pot makers, and this explains how the women's body is treated by them differently. This proverb is called in Telugu, Burda lenide buvaled. In English, it means there is no food without mud. So you need to put your hands in the mud. But if a Brahmin child puts the hands in the mud, they say, no, you are doing Sudra work. You are getting Sudraized. You are getting Dalitized. Dirty. But without mud, there is no food. Now you have to put your hands in the mud and wash after you produce the food. Washing is science, soap. Now this extended to woman's body. Menstrual blood is untouchable. Child procreation is untouchable. And what is really touchable after final product? The child. And for whom it is touchable? At the time of washing, it is touchable to mother only. No father in Hindu culture washes a child. Because washing is not their culture. Only spoiling. Only dirtifying is their culture. Men in India, I'll tell you, if men disappear from India, India will be cleanest. Because we have no culture. I'll tell you why this problem. I have a school in my village. It's called Good Shepherd Schools. As a major challenge from village, how we can start English medium. This is from LKG to 10th. Now we tell our children, all the teachers, both boys and girls need to sweep the house, wash the dishes, wash the clothes. But there is huge resistance from fathers and mothers. No, what will happen? They naturally think if boy washes clothes of girls or cleans the house or washes the dishes, his manhood will disappear. There is this problem of disappearance. I say, let it be disappeared. It has not done very good for this country at all. We are too many. Let one generation go completely. New day generation will come. And my hope is all Brahmins will go. Either by migration or by disappearance. Let them go. See, the point is, I don't hate. I said, I am one of those reconciliators, like Nelson Mandela. But I reconciliate when only you are willing to negotiate. If you don't want to read Why I Am Not a Hindu, why should you read any book? If you don't want to read Buffalo nationalism, why should I read your cow nationalism? So for some time, I took up a campaign. No reading of Brahmin books at all. Any Brahmin author, we should not read. Why? Because so long as they don't read ours, they were not reading Ambedkar for all these years. They were reading only Gandhi. They were reading Nehru, Nehruvian nationalism, Nehruvian socialism. And Nehruvian socialism has produced now, what socialism we know. But Ambedkar, who was a great social scientist, who wrote with elaborative footnote and researching. Where did Gandhi research? Whatever came to his mind, he wrote. So his mind was creative, his thought. But Ambedkar's was. So then we said, let us stop reading Gandhi and Nehru till they read Ambedkar. And now they are reading. Because they know, once we stop reading, after we educated, where will be the market? These Oxford, Cambridge publishers are not very friendly, sympathetic to us. Now there is a Dalit textual market. That is our only book selling. Communist books are not selling at all. Stopped. Communists themselves are not even, Prakash Karat and Sitaram Yachuri are not reading now. Leave alone others. So the problem is that a new generation of literature has come. A new generation of readers have come. A new generation of idea has come. And this historiography is relinking. We go back to Buddha. We go back to Sudra writers. We go back to Savitribai. We go back to Pule. And we connect to the present. The Dalit autobiographies. The OBC life. The women's life. Finally, I would say, there is a great difference of women's liberation in Dalit literature, Dalit Bahujan literature and Brahminic literature. If you hang around Sita, Savitri, Anasuya, I'll tell you, rape will not come down. You have to go and pick up Savitri Bais. You have to go and pick up Sumangala in Buddhist tradition. If men were trying to rape, these women were kicking them back. So this Hindu Nari business is a big problem. And I keep telling, if the university permit me, I have been campaigning against sari and blouse dress because they are not kicking back dresses. You need to fight the Indian men because Indian Brahminic patriarchy is dead against women all through, in spite of reforms. So what we need to take is the Dalit Bahujan democratic patriarchal structures. There is patriarchy, but there is democracy. If husband beats wife, wife will run into the street and say that this fellow is beating me. So what to do? All community will come. Either they beat him back or they will say divorce. Divorce and go. So we have very easy divorce and remarriage. It is there in Islam, it is there in other cultures. So women's liberation comes in a significant way if you look at the Dalit Bahujan literary traditions. Construct them, go back to villages, write about their practices, their food culture, their pluralities, their imaginations. It is a very fertile ground. For English literature students, I think India is the most fertile ground for writing new genre. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.
It was such a beautiful, nice, scintillating discourse on Dalit historiography.